This wasn't supposed to happen. A Trump courtroom hearing just detonated into chaos when his own lawyer collapsed and admitted everything on the record. Not rumors, not leaks. A full-on confession, hidden evidence, misrepresentation, a cover-up exposed in real time. The judge didn't hesitate. No delays, no games. Immediate testimony ordered as the courtroom froze. Power shifted. Control vanished. Trump's entire defense strategy collapsed in seconds. This isn't politics. It's a legal meltdown with democracy watching. One admission triggered a chain reaction that could end everything. And what the judge said next is why this story isn't stopping here.
Just into NBC News, the Justice Department is currently investigating the New York Attorney General's office. The focus is the successful $300 million civil fraud case against Donald Trump and his businesses, as well as the case New York AG Letitia James brought against the NRA. Now, James emerged as one of Trump's most outspoken political rivals after he left office in 2021.
Here's what's happening beneath the viral framing and why it matters far beyond Donald Trump's ego. A lot of people hear civil fraud case and their eyes glaze over. They think it's paperwork. They think it's rich people arguing over numbers. But that's not what this is. This is a stress test for whether the United States still has a baseline rule. If you lie to get financial benefits and you get caught, you don't get to rewrite reality just because you're powerful. Start with the part we actually can anchor in something solid. New York's civil fraud case produced a liability finding that Trump and his business inflated and manipulated valuations. And then, in August 2025, New York's Appellate Division issued a split decision that did two important things at once. It upheld the judgment on the core conduct, while also saying the trial court's massive disgorgement order, nearly $500 million paid to the state, was an excessive fine under the Eighth Amendment and couldn't stand in that form.
In the ruling, the judges upheld the fraud judgment, but said, quote, the $500 million to the state of New York is an excessive fine that violates the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
The case centers on allegations that Mr. Trump misled banks and insurers by inflating or deflating the value of his assets when it suited him and exaggerated his net worth by billions of dollars. New York State Attorney General Letitia James says she plans to appeal the ruling. For more on the impact of the decision, I spoke earlier with former federal prosecutor Jessica Roth, currently a professor at Cardozo School of Law. Jessica Roth, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So this was a lengthy ruling, more than 300 pages. What were the main points of contention among the judges, and how did their differing opinions shape the outcome?
Yeah, so this was a complicated split decision. As you noted, it's over 300 pages, and we have 3 opinions, and the reasoning of the judges divided 2, 2, and 1. There was one point of commonality among all the justices, and that was that the trial court's order could not stand as it was written. But beyond there, we had disagreement among the justices.
That detail matters because it tells you how grown-up court systems work when they're allowed to work. Courts don't operate on vibes. They don't operate on loyalty. They operate on written rules, burdens of proof, and remedies that have limits. Even when the defendant is somebody judges might personally dislike, or somebody half the country is screaming about. That appellate panel wasn't saying fraud is fine. They were saying, you proved the case. But this particular punishment is constitutionally excessive. Now, that's the legal reality. But the political reality is what Trump's movement does with it. They take anything that sounds like a win, strip it of nuance, and turn it into a propaganda brick. See? Total vindication. The whole thing was a hoax. And that's where the danger lives. Because the goal isn't just to defend Trump. The goal is to train Americans to stop believing in accountability itself. To stop believing that evidence matters, to stop believing that judges are referees instead of enemies. And the reason this current courtroom explosion narrative spreads so fast is because it sits on top of something people have watched for years. Trump's instinct to treat every process like it's a reality show he can bully into submission. Courts are one of the few places where that instinct hits a wall. Judges can't be ratioed on social media into changing a deadline. A court record doesn't care how famous you are. A deposition transcript doesn't blush when you try to charm it. So when you hear a story about a judge ordering immediate testimony, or a lawyer admitting evidence was mishandled, you should think less about the drama and more about what judges actually protect, the integrity of the process. Because in any case, especially a major fraud case, discovery is the bloodstream. If one side plays games with evidence, the whole system starts to rot. You don't get justice. You get whoever cheats best. That's why discovery violations are not a minor technical foul. They're the kind of thing judges take personally, not because they're sensitive, but because the court is responsible for a fair contest. If the judge believes one side is hiding the ball, the judge's job is to stop the game, figure out what happened, and impose consequences that make sure it doesn't happen again. And there's a second layer here. When your whole political brand is the system is rigged, you can't allow the system to function normally. Because if the system functions normally, if judges write opinions you can read, if grand juries hear evidence and say no, if prosecutors get told they need warrants, then Trump's big story collapses. The story has to be constant persecution, constant chaos, constant enemies. Order is the enemy of the con, which brings us to what's happening at the federal level in December 2025. The Justice Department, under Trump, has repeatedly tried and repeatedly failed to re-indict New York Attorney General Letitia James. Not once, twice in a week, according to AP, after a prior dismissal tied to an unlawfully appointed U.S. attorney. That is an extraordinary rebuke in American legal culture because grand juries usually give prosecutors what they ask for. When a grand jury says no, it's a neon sign that something is weak, messy, or politically contaminated. And we need to say this plainly. This doesn't mean Letitia James is above scrutiny. Nobody is. But it does mean the country is watching the Justice Department be pulled toward a very dangerous model. One where federal power is used as a tool of retaliation, not a neutral instrument of law. That's the through line. Rule of law versus impunity. Rule of law is boring. It's not merch. It's not slogans. It's paperwork and standards and judges saying no to everyone at different times. Impunity is emotional. It tells you your team should never have to answer questions. Your team should never lose. If your team loses, it proves the referee is corrupt. That's not democracy. That's a personality cult trying to dress itself up as patriotism. And the reason this matters to ordinary people is simple. If powerful people can treat courts as optional, then courts become optional for everyone else too, but only in one direction. The poor and the middle class don't get to ignore subpoenas. They don't get to stall for years with endless motions. They don't get to turn their trials into fundraising events. The two systems of justice complaint become self-fulfilling, but not the way Trump fans claim. It becomes two systems because the wealthy and connected are allowed to jam the gears. Now, I want to be responsible about the viral courtroom specifics. We can't just accept every dramatic detail from a YouTube transcript as established fact. Sometimes those scripts blend real legal developments with speculation, and sometimes they outright exaggerate. That's why I stick to what we can verify. The appellate opinion language is real and it is blunt. It says the disgorgement order is an excessive fine that violates the Eighth Amendment. And the reporting on DOJ efforts against James is real, and it's current, and it's alarming. But even if we put the most sensational claims to the side, the underlying logic remains. In a system that's functioning, courts force answers. They force evidence. They force timelines. And that's exactly what Trump and MAGA media hate, because their survival strategy is delay plus distortion. Look at the way the Fifth Amendment gets deployed in the public conversation. The Fifth is real. It exists for a reason. But there's also a reason judges can draw adverse inferences in civil cases when somebody refuses to answer. And we have documented evidence that Trump invoked the Fifth more than 400 times in the New York civil fraud investigation deposition that became public. Again, he had the right to do it, but politically, he tried to have it both ways. I'm innocent. It's all a witch hunt, and I refuse to answer basically anything. That contradiction is the entire Trump experience. Demand total trust while refusing basic transparency. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you build your life and your movement around never conceding error, never admitting fault, never acknowledging reality, then the moment you're put under oath becomes terrifying, because oath strips away the protective bubble. Under oath, if you lie, it's perjury. Under oath, if your story shifts, it's on the record. Under oath, your team can't just shout fake news at the stenographer. This is why authoritarian-leaning movements attack courts. Not because courts are perfect, courts aren't, but because courts are one of the last institutions that can still say, no, you don't get to just declare your own truth. And we can see the same tension in another December 2025 development. A federal judge ruled that prosecutors must return materials seized from Daniel Richman, a former attorney for James Comey, because keeping copies without proper safeguards would be an unreasonable seizure, while still leaving DOJ room to seek a new warrant. That's a judge doing exactly what judges are supposed to do: enforce constitutional boundaries, even in politically radioactive cases. Now connect the dots. On one side, you have courts trying to maintain standards. Warrants matter, remedies have limits. Procedures exist for a reason. On the other side, you have a political movement that treats standards as obstacles and boundaries as insults. That's not just hardball politics. That's the architecture of democratic decline. And if you've ever wondered how democracies slide without a single dramatic moment, without tanks in the streets, this is it. It's the slow normalization of the idea that the leader is the law. It's the steady conditioning of people to accept retaliation as governance. It's the manipulation of distrust so that citizens stop asking what's true and start asking only who benefits. Now let's talk about why the evidence question is so explosive in a Trump fraud context. Fraud cases are, at heart, about trust. Banks, insurers, and counterparties rely on representations. If those representations are knowingly false, the whole system becomes a casino where lying is profitable. And if the penalty for lying is just, oops, caught, the incentive structure is broken. That's why disgorgement exists as a concept, to remove the benefit of misconduct. But the appellate opinion shows the legal friction point. When disgorgement becomes punitive in scale, constitutional limits like the excessive fines clause can come into play, and judges have to draw lines. Here's the key thing. That's not Trump wins. That's the system is arguing with itself in public using law. That's what you want. You want disagreement to happen inside institutions, under rules, with receipts. MAGA politics tries to short-circuit that. It doesn't want you to read the opinion. It wants you to feel a rush of team victory. It wants the story to be emotional, not factual, because facts create vulnerability. And this is where the judge is furious at the lawyer framing catches fire, because it speaks to something everyone understands, even if they've never read a legal brief. If you hid something and got caught, the adult in the room is going to demand answers. Now, let's be honest. Trump's entire career has been about escaping the adult in the room. He survived by creating confusion, threatening people, exhausting opponents, and making institutions hesitate. That's what delay and deny looks like when you have money and media. But there's a limit. Even friendly institutions have a limit. Even cautious judges have a limit. Even grand juries that usually rubber stamp prosecutors sometimes hit a limit and say, this doesn't smell right. And when that limit arrives, Trump's movement doesn't respond by adapting. It responds by trying to delegitimize the limit itself. If a court decision is unfavorable, the judge is corrupt. If prosecutors fail, the jury is rigged. If the case collapses because a prosecutor was unlawfully appointed, they don't say, "We broke the rules." They say, "The rules are the problem." That mindset is poison. Because democratic citizenship depends on the belief that losing is not the end of the world. That you can lose today and win tomorrow without tearing down the system. Trumpism cannot accept that. It treats losing as humiliation, and humiliation as a justification for revenge. So when you ask, what does this mean going forward? I think it means three big things. Again, even if you ignore the most viral exaggerations. First, it means courts are going to be more skeptical of Trump world representations. Credibility matters in law. Once a court believes your team plays games, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. You get tighter deadlines. You get sharper scrutiny. You get orders that are less indulgent. You get judges who stop accepting "trust us" and start demanding verification. Second, it means the political cost spreads outward. Trump can survive scandals that feel abstract, but weaponizing DOJ against political opponents and playing games with evidence are not abstract to normal voters. Those are basic fairness instincts. People might not know what disgorgement means, but they know what retaliation feels like. They know what cheating looks like. And third, it means the core American choice gets louder. Do we want a country where courts can still say no, where warrants still matter, where prosecutors can be rebuked, where punishments have limits? Or do we want a country where power is personal and law is just a costume? Because I promise you, if you let one faction normalize retaliation, you won't like it when the other faction learns the same lesson. The only reason this country doesn't spiral into endless revenge cycles is because we've had institutional norms that restrain the worst impulses of politics. Trumpism isn't just breaking those norms, it's mocking them. It's selling norm breaking as strength. That's not strength. It's insecurity with a flag draped over it. And here's the part I think a lot of people miss. None of this requires you to be a Democrat. You can hate democratic policies. You can vote Republican your whole life. You can believe in conservative governance. But if you're okay with a Justice Department being pushed into retribution mode, if you're okay with political enemies being targeted because the leader wants payback, you're not defending conservatism. You're defending a strong man. And strong men don't share power. They don't stop at your enemies. They eventually come for anyone who isn't useful. That's why pro-democracy talk can't just be anti-Trump. It has to be pro-standards, pro-constraints, pro-facts, pro-judges who sometimes rule in ways you don't like. Because that's what it looks like when courts aren't just another political arm. So yes, pay attention to the courtroom drama, but don't get hypnotized by it. The deeper story is that the American experiment is once again facing the same old question. Are we a nation of laws or a nation of men? If we're a nation of laws, then even a president can be investigated, sued, sanctioned, rebuked, and forced to answer questions under rules that don't bend to his mood. If we're a nation of men, then the only law is whatever protects the leader and punishes the enemy. And you don't have to speculate about which direction Trump prefers. You can watch it in real time. The pressure campaigns, the loyalty demands, the constant narrative that institutions are illegitimate unless they serve him, and the repeated attempts to turn government into a personal weapon. The patriotic response isn't blind trust in any one person. It's insisting that no one gets to be above the rules. Because the moment you make an exception for your guy, you're teaching the country to stop believing in fairness at all. And when fairness dies, democracy dies with it.